Welcome to this Camel K demo, where we want to normalize web services with Camel K and AtlasMap. The scenario is as follows. Every organization has core capabilities running on bare metal, VMs, or containers. And with time, new systems are incorporated, perhaps from company acquisitions. Because these core systems use different protocols, implementing services to access them becomes hard. Ideally, you'd like to define a thin layer on top to standardize and normalize access. When further new systems come along, for example from partnerships, it's easy to extend the API layer by reusing components and templates. Let's follow an example where we have a backend XML service. The goal is to expose the capability using the OpenAPI specification so that clients can send and receive JSON payloads. Our Camel K integration will encapsulate the OpenAPI exposure and integrate with the backend XML service. The central piece of functionality is responsible to perform two tasks. On one hand, it has to translate JSON into XML during the request flow and XML back into JSON during the response flow. And on the other hand, it has to perform field mapping and transformation, as both JSON and XML may have structural differences. We will use AtlasMap, which allows us to visually design data transformations and allows us to use a single component in Camel to perform both tasks in one single step. Let's go ahead and run the demo. The first thing I'd like to show you is the environment. So this is an OpenShift environment where we can see in place the Camel K operator that will be watching custom resource definitions, and as soon as they show up, he will apply them and then deploy Camel K integrations. So what we want to do in here is to deploy the simulator or the stub that is going to mimic the XML service and make sure it's running properly. And then after that, then deploy our Camel K integration. And then fire an event and see what happens. So let's look at the source code. And we will start with the stub, so the XML service. So we have the sources here. And what I'd like to show you first is the payload that we want to use to respond. So as you can see, it's an XML payload with a name, a surname, and an address. And this is a non-flat structure with some random data. What we define as well is the Camel K integration, or in this case is very simple, is just using the REST DSL in Camel, defining a post operation called getDetails as well. And the only thing that we do here is fetch that hard-coded response.xml. That's all. We are going to run this with a script. You can see the contents of the script, sorry, it's not that one, but this one. We use the Camel client, we say Camel run, we pass the name of the Camel K integration, some properties, and this is the XML response payload that we want to use. With this, we can go to the terminal and simply run this integration. When we do that, we will jump quickly to the environment, and as you can see, the Camel K operator is deploying the end one. So that seems to be already up and running. Let's just make sure that it is responding as we expect. So we say call. This is just a call command that is going to fire against that instance, and we see that we are getting our XML response. So far, so good. The following thing we want to look at then is to build and deploy that so the main integration that is going to expose the XML service as OpenAPI. So we jump to the sources here, and the first thing I'd like to show you is the OpenAPI JSON definition, which is this JSON source file where we have the operation defined here. How did we define this? I'll show you straight away. So we have used API Studio to build this OpenAPI service. This is a visual tool that will help us create operations, data types, and so on. We can see the source in here. So this is the source in YAML. And we can export this as JSON and include it in our source file. At design time, we just need to define operations here. I'm not going to dive into the tool because it's not the purpose of the demo, but the important piece here is that this operation that we have defined is a post, and the key part here is the operation ID. Remember this operation ID, get details, because it has to match the operation ID in the Camel root. Okay. From here, we can trigger live documentation just to check that everything looks as we expect. So this is the subscriber OpenAPI definition. It defines one operation. It responds with 200. And this would be the response type that it is giving. We have some samples here. We see that the request would have some identifier, and then the response would be a flat structure with a full name, and then 3 address lines. Okay, so with this, then we can go back to our source, and we close the OpenAPI JSON. And the first thing I like to show to you is, as per the endpoint, we have the API spec, which in Camel with the REST DSL, we can expose our OpenAPI JSON file, so the specification, so that it is discoverable by clients, right? So this is the purpose of this file. But then the main root, the main Camel root, would be this one. So this would be the main implementation that we are interested in understanding. So first of all, you see that we are using there the same operation ID value that links to the OpenAPI spec. So this is what we need to do. And then Camel K will be smart enough to channel incoming JSON requests into this particular route because the name is matching. The first action, as you can see here, is executing with the AtlasMap component in Camel, the request transformation called request ADM. So this is a definition used with AtlasMap, and therefore what we need to do is to create that transformation. Let's do it live on screen. So what we do is we come to VS Code on the command palette and we say open AtlasMap. This is going to launch the AtlasMap VS Code extension that we will use to define the request transformation. So we just wait a little bit, and here comes on screen. So the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we have some samples here for the request JSON, the request XML, so that we can pass those data shapes to AtlasMap, and so that we know how to map these fields. So we say here import instance or schema file. So we click there and we say and we specify what the request is going to look like. So as you can see, this is the one that will have the identifier in JSON. So we click open. We say it's an instance. We could pass a schema as well. And that has been loaded. You can see here on the left part that we have the identifier as one of the fields in the source panel. We need to do the same for the target. So in this case, what we want is to specify an XML structure. So you see that it's the equivalent, but in XML, this is what we are going to forward to the backend endpoint. So we click open and we say this is also an instance. And with this, we have loaded the data shapes. We can deploy here, and then we can just simply drag and drop this field mapping. So the request flow is trivial, we can say. Okay, so this is ready as per the request. Now with this, we can export this and include it into our source files. So we say confirm, and inside the map folder, we just specify here that it's going to have the name that Camel is expecting. So request.adm, we save it. Okay, so we have now our request flow data mapping definition. So this is the one that we are going to execute here. Now, once we have the data transformation defined, all we need to do is just to invoke the backend. For that, we just need to specify that it's going to be a post operation and that we are sending some XML data. So we prepare a couple of headers in Camel, and then we use the HTTP component to call the backend. So this is just a configuration parameter, and this is the path. Camel/subscriber details. So this will call the backend that is already in our environment running. And obviously we are going to obtain the XML response. With the XML response, we now need to apply a second transformation using AtlasMap that will convert the XML response into the JSON structure that complies with the OpenAPI specification. So now we need to define a second data map. So let's do that. We are going to reset all of these. And we are going to now import the XML response that we are expecting to see. So this is a sample. It looks like exactly as the XML file that I've shown earlier. So we say open, we say it's an instance, and we should get the data structure that shows the fields that we've seen in XML. And okay, with this now we can load the JSON flat structure that we have defined in the OpenAPI spec. As you can see, there's 4 fields there. We say it's an instance as well. We click OK, and now we have the source panel and the target panel ready for us to map. So what we can do is just simply drag and drop. Let me just minimize this a little bit. And we drag and drop the name into the full name. And the following thing we can do is drag and drop the surname into the full name as well. This AtlasMap will automatically concatenate using the space separator. And this mapping is already done. So we can just close this and continue with the rest of the fields. We deploy here the other fields. And we say that, for example, on the first line, we are going to concatenate the number of the house, for example. So we drag it there, and it's already in place. And we can select the second field. We are going to say number and, for example, street. So now we have 2 fields defined for the first line. Now, for the second line, for example, we can drag and drop the city and then the postcode that we include in here as well. So we do like this. They're going to be concatenated with the space separator as well. And lastly, we can map the country on the third line of address. Okay, so this is done. I think we have our mapping definition for the response flow as well. So we can export this into our source files. We say confirm. And in this case, instead of calling it request, we calling it response. We say save, and we just double check that it matches what we expect. So this is the request ADM. This is the response ADM. We see that we have now included both mapping definitions with AtlasMap in our map folder. And we are ready really to deploy this. When we use this script, you can see that we use the Camel client. Let me just zoom this again. We say camel run, we give it a name, we pass both the REST DSL specification with camel as the main root definition in camel, and then we pass the OpenAPI JSON so that is discoverable, and some properties here, and then both mapping definitions, the request for the request flow and the response flow. Right, so let's quickly look at the environment again and deploy this integration that we just have completed. So we go here to Camel K and we can say run with the script I've just shown to you. So when we do that, we see that it's running the camel run command, passing all the parameters. The operator is going to see that custom resource definition in place because it has been pushed by the client, and is going to then deploy the Camel K integration that we should see in right now. As we can see now, it's starting and it seems to be already in place. Okay, and this is actually in front of the endpoint, we could say. And so let's just run an invocation to see if everything is happening. We should get all the data from XML transformed into JSON back. So we come to our terminal and we are going to do a call command, which is under the covers executing a curl. And just to verify that we are getting what we expect. And effectively, we see here the JSON response with the full name, sum1, address line with the data, address line 2 with the postcode and some other data, and then the UK as the country. Okay, so it seems that it is working well. I just want to show you how we can discover this service using an OpenAPI client and execute exactly the same invocation. So for that, let's just obtain the address where this service is running. So we get the external URL that we can use. And then here I just open a OpenAPI client that we can use. Here we can load the OpenAPI spec by saying http:// we put the root name, and then here we put camel openapi.json. We parse this, and the client discovers the subscriber service, and it finds the post operation that we can invoke. So I'm going to click there, and now I just need to include here again the address, the URL, and then with the prefix camel there. And you see that the default payload is just an identifier. We could put any value there really for the sake of testing. And then we can click send. And this is giving us then back the JSON full response where it has a flat structure, and we obtain all the data that was sent by the backend in XML. So there you go. We have completed the invocation into the completed service that we have defined with AtlasMap. We have deployed this very quickly in the environment, and you see how everything is running. And with that, we are done with the demo. So yeah, thank you very much for being there, and I hope this was very useful to you. See you next time. Bye.